Okay, thank you so much for being my 7 people. I really appreciate it. Try to make this as interesting as possible. Today we're going to talk about, does anybody know what this is?
Computer?
Well, no, what's on the computer?
A slideshow?
Come on.
Energy crisis.
Do you remember this? Anything that's going on in this period where you kids?
70s energy crisis, gas
Yes.
prices were as high as they'd ever been.
Yes, and they were lining up. We just plain didn't have gas.
That's right.
Everybody can say. So today we're going to discuss what happened to create this gas crisis in 1970 and how that relates to the gas hike in 2007-2008. Although we made it through our little $5 a gallon gas hike here, and gas prices are now down, we're not out of the water. There's still a lot of things we have to do to change our course. I've done a lot of research, not only for this particular speech, but also when gas went up, I wanted to find out why. So, first we're going to talk about the first U.S. oil peak that happened in 1970. Then we'll talk about how that's going on worldwide now. And then we'll talk about what we can do to sort of stop or at least curb our dependence on oil for everything, which is what we depend on it now for. We'll start with 1930. 1930, it's the industrial age. We are expanding as a population, we're expanding as a country, we're using all sorts of resources that we didn't use before. And it takes, oil is a cheap commodity. We can produce 100 barrels of oil with 1 barrel of oil. So it's a really cheap way to keep our cars going, keep our plants going, our factories, everything. We make, over the next, over the 20th century, there was all sorts of industrial uses for petroleum. Now, peak oil was first discovered by M. King Hubbert, and he created this oil discovery and production chart. He used oil discovery. That's when people discovered, you remember the Beverly Hillbillies, how people were discovering oil in their backyard and it was making them rich. Well, that was all happening, and that was all well and good, and oil was cheap and everybody was happy until right around 1970 when oil production or oil discovery dipped down a bit, and then following production dipped down a bit also. And that's when you have the U.S. looking for other sources of oil. That's when we start making the deals with Saudi Arabia and the Middle East in general to supplement our oil needs, because even though production and discovery dipped down, we still needed oil. The growth, the demand for it was still going up. So then we bring in Saudi Arabia to supply our oil needs, and since then there's been multiple wars that have gone on that we've been involved in that area of the world in order to protect our cheap source of energy. So now we fast forward. So this is just in the U.S. Our production goes down, we find a way to supplement it, and then everything's fine. We don't really, the gas prices go down, we go on as normal, and we don't really find alternate sources of energy, which we should have at that time. If we did, we wouldn't be in the sort of situation that we are now, and 50 years from now we may have run out of alternatives. So this is the time when we really have to do something about it. So here we are, worldwide oil discovery, and we had our peak, and we're on our way down. And discovery relates to production, because if we're not finding oil, we're not producing oil. And we talked about 100 barrels per 1 barrel. Now we're making 30 barrels with 1 barrel of oil. So it's not a cheap source of energy anymore. It's getting more and more expensive, even though we're finding ways to supplement it. James D. Hamilton from the Department of Economics in University of San Diego said that the price run-up of 2007 2008 was caused by strong demand confronting staggering world production, which is basically what happened in 1970, but on a smaller scale, just in the United States. Now that's happening worldwide. And how that affected us, it affected all of us. We were in a recession almost, but the gas hike sent us into a real recession that it stopped the automotive sales for the country and basically bankrupted some automotive companies. So it really affects our overall well-being. If we cannot, we need a cheap source of energy. The population has expanded. We all need a cheap source of energy in order to support this kind of expansion that we're going through. And we have to think of other ways to get that now. We do have enough oil. Peak oil doesn't mean oil's running out. It just means we hit our peak. And now we're on our way down. So we're at the... Okay, so it doesn't mean we ran out of oil. It just means that we've discovered most of the oil that's available to us. And this is the point where we have to start finding other ways in order to supplement our oil production, like solar energy. We have to support things like hybrid cars or cars that don't use oil at all, because most of the farmers use a lot of oil. Most food that is in your refrigerator has traveled about 1,200 miles to get to your refrigerator, and those are small things that we can do to help cut down the amount of oil that we use, just like with regular things. Knowing where your food comes from and buying local foods from local farmers that are close to you, so your food doesn't have to waste gallons and gallons of gas to get to you. Checking where your food comes from in the supermarket. If we purchase foods that are made closer, then they'll stop bringing all that other stuff in from all over the country, even China. Some of our food comes from China. So the number one thing that you can do to help stop this dependency on oil is just be informed of what's out there that's an alternative to what you're using now. Vote for your local and federal government, or vote for local and federal government people, put people in that recognize it as a problem and want to change it. Because if we just ignore it, eventually we're not going to be able to ignore it anymore. And our cheap source is going to be totally depleted, and wars are going to start to find, for the small amount that's left, there'll be wars, there'll be depletion of areas that should be protected. We'll go into Alaska and rip it all up because we just need that oil, and if we start now, in 50 years from now, we'll be okay. Thank you very much for listening.